In this Gospel Online presentation, I'm going to make the case that we can trust that the story of the birth of Jesus, as it's told in the Bible, is true. So I've got my Bible right here. We'll be making reference to it as we make our way through the presentation. It's something that comes up particularly at this time of year. So when we hear again the heartwarming story of the birth of Jesus, maybe we wonder whether we can trust it, whether the whole story is true. And like I say, I'm going to take you through some compelling evidence in this presentation that we can trust what we read here. I'm going to start by making the case that history confirms that Jesus really lived. And there's four sort of contemporary historians that we can turn to give us that confidence. The first of which is a man called Josephus. Josephus was a first-century Jewish historian, and he provides external information on some people and some events found in the New Testament. The extant manuscripts of Josephus' book Antiquities of the Jews, written around AD 93 to 94, contain two main references to Jesus of Nazareth. The first and most extensive reference to Jesus in the Antiquities is found in Book 18, states that Jesus was the Messiah and a wise teacher who was crucified by Pontius Pilate, and it's commonly called the Testimonium Flavianum. The second reference to Jesus in the Antiquities found in Book 20, chapter 9, which mentions the brother of Jesus who was called Christ, whose name was James. So here in this, the writings of this Jewish centurion, writing only 60 years or so after the death of Jesus, provides powerful testimony that Jesus really lived. He talks about Jesus being the Messiah, the fact that he was crucified by Pontius Pilate, and he talks about James, and he references him as being Jesus' brother. So, as we say, Josephus provides us with powerful testimony that Jesus really lived. Now, I said there were four historians we can turn to. The second is the Roman historian and senator Tacitus. So, he referred to Jesus, his execution by Pontius Pilate, and the existence of early Christians in Rome in his final work, the Annals, written round about AD 116, Book 15, chapter 44. And the context of the passage is the 6-day Great Fire of Rome that burned much of the city in AD 64 during the reign of the Roman Emperor Nero. The passage is one of the earliest non-Christian references to the origins of Christianity, the execution of Christ described in the Gospels, and the presence and persecution of Christians in first-century Rome. Now, the scholarly consensus is that Tacitus' reference to the execution of Jesus by Pontius Pilate is both authentic and of historical value as an independent Roman source. Tacitus provides non-Christian confirmation of the crucifixion of Jesus. Scholars view it as establishing three separate facts about Rome around about AD 60. One, that there was a sizable number of Christians in Rome at the time. Two, that it was possible to distinguish between Christians and Jews in Rome. And three, that at the time, pagans made a connection between Christianity in Rome and its origin in Roman Judea. That means to say, then, that under the writing of this Roman historian in the 2nd century AD, talks about the life of Jesus himself and the life of his followers, called Christians, as being real people living in and having real events in their lives. So that's the second historian we can turn to provide us with comfort that Jesus really lived. The third is a man referred to as Pliny the Younger. He was the Roman governor of an area called Bithynia and Pontus. Those areas are now in modern Turkey. He wrote a letter to the Emperor Trajan around AD 110 and asked for his advice on how to deal with the early Christian community. The letter details an account of how Pliny conducted trials of suspected Christians who appeared before him as a result of anonymous accusations, and asks for the emperor's guidance on how they should be treated. Well, what does this tell us? Well, this shows that the Christians existed in the 2nd century, and how could it be the case if Jesus Christ, the one they followed, never had lived? So circumstantial evidence, we might say, from Pliny that says that here you've got Christians, and the point being, if you've got Christians, then you must have had a Christ. There must have been one they were following. And the fourth of four people we can refer to is Suetonius. The Christians are explicitly mentioned in Suetonius' biography of the Emperor Nero as among those punished during Nero's reign. These punishments are generally dated to around AD 64, the year of the Great Fire of Rome. In this passage, Suetonius describes Christianity as excessive religiosity, as do his contemporaries, the ones we mentioned, Tacitus and Pliny. So, like Pliny, Suetonius provides evidence that Jesus' followers really existed as early as 30 years after his death. Now, this was a dangerous time to confess to being a Christian, so why would anyone do that if Jesus Christ had not existed? So, if we assume then that Jesus lived, and we would be right to do so, then, well, if he lived, he must have been born somewhere. And why do we need to doubt that that happened in Bethlehem? Because that's what the Gospels tell us. The accounts of Matthew and Luke that we find in the New Testament of our Bibles talk about Jesus being born in the town of Bethlehem. So the first point that we're making there was to say that that we can seriously consider Jesus to be a real person based on the corroboration of independent historians from not long after the time when Jesus lived, such a long time ago from now. Jesus really lived. History confirms us. So where I'm going to now is to make the case that the Gospels, the four Gospels that we find in our Bibles, can be taken as serious historical documents. They refer to real events and real people. Now, I'm opening my Bible now, and I'm opening it at Luke's Gospel, and we find the account of the birth of Jesus in Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2, and he refers here to a census. And that census really happened. Now, we have it here in Luke chapter 2, verse 1. It came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. Now, Caesar Augustus was a real person, a real emperor, and he indeed did require that a census should be taken. Verse 2. The census first took place while Quirinius was governing Syria, so all went to be registered, everyone to his own city. Joseph also went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth, into Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed wife, who was with child. So it was that while they were there, the days were completed for her to be delivered. She brought forth her firstborn son, wrapped him in swaddling cloths, laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. So in that passage from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, verses 1 through 7, we have a reference to the census that was required. Now, history attests to this census being taking place. It's recorded on the so-called Res Gestae Augusti inscription. So there's evidence there this really happened. Now, it's sometimes called into question by critics of the Bible on the basis that there is evidence which points to the census being required before Jesus was born. Well, first of all, the fact that there is evidence for such a census supports the view that we can accept the story of the birth of Jesus as being true. Now, what was the purpose of the Roman censuses? Well, the purpose of the Roman censuses was to calculate the level of taxation Rome could expect from the provinces of the empire. So, unlike censuses we might be used to, these were not tied to having to take place on a particular day. They were done by province, so each province could hold its census at different times. So the fact that there was a census taking place before the time of Jesus' birth doesn't in any way decry from the evidence that the census taking place in Judea was taking place right at the time when Jesus was born. And in fact, the way that the census was carried out was described by the Roman historian Cassius Dio. So both the fact that this census took place and the way in which it took place aligns very precisely with the record that we have here in the Gospel of Luke, attested to by the inscription and by the writings of the historian. So firstly then, in this section about the Gospels can be taken as serious historical documents. They refer to real events. This real event they're being referred to of the census, it really did happen. Now, something else about the Gospels, and Luke's Gospel in particular, is that Luke correctly identifies those in positions of authority at the same time as each other. Now, turning in our Bibles to Luke chapter 3, he gives a list of such people and is very, very precise with this list. Luke chapter 3, verse 1. Now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, one person, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, the second person, Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, the third person, his brother Philip, tetrarch of Iturea and the region of Trachonitis, that's the fourth person, and Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene, the fifth person. 5 people in authority at the time that he mentions, and he's setting out that these 5 were all in their positions of authority at the same time. This is a really easy point to be able to check out, and so we can. So the first person mentioned there, Tiberius Caesar. Tiberius Caesar, he was the emperor from AD 14 to 37. So the 15th year of his position there would be AD 28 or 29. Pontius Pilate as the governor of Judea. Well, we can date him from our history resources to AD 26 to 36. AD 26 to 36 covers the span of AD 28 or 29. Therefore, Pontius Pilate was the governor of Judea at the same time that Tiberius Caesar was the emperor. So you come to third person that's mentioned there, Herod being tetrarch of Galilee. This is Herod Antipas, and he was indeed the ruler of Galilee from the death of his father, Herod the Great, in BC 4 right through to AD 39. So a much longer period of time there. But BC 4 to AD 39, it covers the years AD 28 and 29. And so therefore, Herod would have been the ruler of Galilee at the same time that Pontius Pilate was the governor of Judea, and then in turn at the same time that Tiberius Caesar was the emperor. The fourth person that Luke refers to here, Philip, ruler of Iturea and Trachonitis, while he had that position from BC 4, the death of Herod the Great, through to AD 34. again, it covers the same span of those critical years, AD 28 and 29. So all four, Philip, Herod Antipas, Pontius Pilate, Tiberius Caesar, are all in their positions of authority, exactly as Luke says, at the same time. Now, Lysanias, Tetrarch of Abilene, this is an interesting one because Lysanias died in BC 36, so much earlier than our critical years, AD 28-29. But on account of Luke's record, historians accept that there must have been another Lysanias in these years, AD 28-29. You see then that that historians will, by and large, take the details such as this that we find in the gospel records and say that they are reliable historical documents. Actually, in Luke chapter 3, he goes on to talk about two other people. He talks about Annas, the high priest, and Caiaphas. Talks about them both being high priests. Now, Annas was high priest from AD 6 to AD 15, but Caiaphas was his son-in-law, and he had significant influence over his son-in-law, and he was high priest from AD 18 to 36, once again spanning our critical years of AD 28 and 29. So our point here then is to show that Luke correctly identifies those in position of authority at the same time very, very precisely. You see, we really can take the Gospels as serious historical documents. So that's Luke's Gospel. I'm now turning in my Bible to Matthew's Gospel and the story of the birth of Jesus, which in Matthew's Gospel we find in chapter 2. Now, here in chapter 2 of Matthew, in verse 1, we read, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king." Now that's important because there were a number of Herods that were around in the time of the writings of the New Testament. But this one's correctly identified as the king. So that distinguishes this Herod from any of his children who did not have the title king. Herod the Great was very proud of this title, the king of the Jews, and made sure he found its way onto coins that were made at the time. So we can see examples of coins which would have that inscription of Herod the king. So once again, the point we're making here then is that the Gospels can be taken as serious historical documents because they correctly very precisely refer correctly to people of the time. Now, the other thing about the Gospels is that they haven't changed over the centuries. They haven't been tinkered with over the 2,000 years that have passed since the events that they describe. Well, why can we say that? Well, we can say that because of the sheer volume of New Testament texts that there are, in excess of 10,000. So you imagine if you had a plan to alter a document and there happened to be two documents, you'd need to make sure that you altered both. Otherwise, someone would see that the fabrication you sought to do. Similarly, if you got 10 documents, you'd have to make sure you altered all of them, all 10. It would just be an impossibility with the sheer volume of New Testament text that we have now to go in and to alter all of them, and there would always be the question as to whether there are more that could be unearthed, and so we can be confident and take the gospel accounts as reliable, serious historical documents, also because they haven't been changed since they were first written. Okay, good. So we're looking at the story of the birth of Jesus is true, and I'm now going to into this next section, which is that people at the time were expecting Messiah to be born. Yeah, so we can look at the evidence that there were people around at the time who were saying sometime round about now the promised Messiah is going to be born, and that adds further weight to the position I'm taking in this presentation, that the story of the birth of Jesus is true. Now, I'm in my Bible again, Matthew chapter 2, verse 1 again. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who is being born King of the Jews? We have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. Interesting then, that you've got wise men from the east were clearly expecting the Messiah, the so-called King of the Jews, to be born around this time, and they wanted to find him and they wanted to honor him. Now, it's quite likely that these wise men were basing their expectation on the prophecy that the Hebrew Daniel gave some 500 years previously, when he too was in the east, where these wise men have come from. And we've got Daniel's prophecy in our Bibles. Daniel and chapter 9 has what's called the 70-week prophecy. And it's thought that the wise men were basing their expectation that the King of the Jews would be coming soon on this 70-week prophecy. It's in Daniel chapter 9. And I'm just going to read an extract from that now, starting at verse 24. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublesome times. Now it is a complicated and enigmatic prophecy, the 70-week prophecy is. But one thing that's clear from the couple of verses I've just read is that it was meant to be time-bound. That is to say, it would have a start and an end. And the start was the point when the command to restore and build Jerusalem, and the end should be until Messiah the Prince. And the people who were thinking about what Daniel had said and were studying his words after he'd died were calculating based on the 70-week prophecy when they thought the Messiah would come. And that's why in Matthew chapter 2, we meet these wise men, these astrologers, that were coming from the east, from the place where Daniel was when he'd made that prophecy. And they were coming looking for the King of the Jews. They figured out it was about now. Of course, they went to the wrong place. They said that they go to Jerusalem because they expect that the King of the Jews would be in the capital city. It's reasonable, isn't it? But they don't find the King of the Jews there. They find Herod the Great there. Now we carry on reading in verse 3 of Matthew chapter 2. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea. And the reason why they say that the Messiah was to be born in Bethlehem was because of the writings of the prophecy Micah, which he had given some 700 years previously. And Matthew quotes Micah. He says, for thus it is written by the prophet, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. It's crystal clear then that the that the Christ, the Messiah, the King of the Jews, should be born in Bethlehem, according to Daniel's prophecy, which the wise men were following, and according to Micah's prophecy, which the religious leaders of the day in Israel were following. Let's carry on with Matthew's account then here, verse 7. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also. When they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. Now, some interesting facts just to point out here, that these men were wise men. They were not kings. And furthermore, that there were 3 gifts, not 3 men. And so therefore, the notion that we hear in the Christmas story of you have 3 kings coming from afar is not necessarily true. The story of the birth of Jesus, as set out in the gospel records, talks about them being wise men, and between them bringing these gifts, 3 gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So that's an important distinction to be made when we think about and we hear the Christmas story. Well, which story of the birth of Jesus is it that's true? And the story of the birth of Jesus that's true is the one we find right here in our Bibles, specifically in the gospel records of Matthew and Luke. Now, I'm turning to Luke's account of the story of the birth of Jesus now, all in this presentation, which is all about the story of the birth of Jesus being true. You see, there were other people who were expecting the Messiah to be born around about this time when Jesus was born. And there's 2 people in particular that I'm going to show you. They are Simeon and Anna. And Simeon we meet in Luke chapter 2 and verse 25. Behold, there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon, and this man was just and devout, waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was upon him. And it had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. So he came by the Spirit into the temple, and when the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him according to the custom of the law, he took him up in his arms and blessed God and said, Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared before the face of all peoples, a light to bring revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel. You see then that this man was expecting the Messiah to be born. He'd been told, in actual fact, by God that the Messiah would be born in his lifetime, and here he is witnessing it. So we can be confident then that the story of the birth of Jesus is true because people at the time were expecting this to happen. It's another part, another piece in the jigsaw that gives us this confidence in the account of the birth of Jesus as we find it in our Bibles. So the second person who is expecting the Messiah to be born around now is the lady Anna. And we meet her in Luke chapter 2, verse 36. Now there was one Anna, a prophetess, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. She was of a great age and had lived with her husband 7 years from her virginity. And this woman was a widow of about 84 years, who did not depart from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers night and day. And coming in that instant, she gave thanks to the Lord, and spoke of him to all those who looked for redemption in Jerusalem. You see, there was Anna and a group of other people as well who were all expecting Messiah to be born. And this is part of the evidence that leads us to the conclusion that the story of the birth of Jesus, as told here in our Bibles, is true. And that, as we've mentioned previously, that is a crucial distinction, because the story of the birth of Jesus told at Christmas has additional details that are not here in the gospel accounts. As we've mentioned previously, they were wise men, not kings. There weren't three of them, there were three gifts. We're not told here that Jesus was sleeping with the animals. And there's nothing in here either about Mary riding on a donkey. And so this gives us complete confidence that the accounts that we have in our New Testament tell truly the story of the birth of Jesus. So, if you hear the story of the birth of Jesus being told again at this Christmas time, and you're just wondering whether it's true or not, well, take yourself to Matthew chapter 2 and Luke chapter 2 and read the story of the birth of Jesus as we find it there. And there, it is true. Please subscribe to this channel and dial in next week when we'll be continuing this theme, looking at different aspects of Jesus Christ. Thank you.